not know what's going on in this country. And nor may they ever, because of course we keep these things under wraps, keep these things a secret.
Something's not working. We can't fix it the way we broke it.
Doctors have to do everything in their power to keep themselves from being sued, and so the more they can do to control the birthing environment, the less they're liable for. And I think that's why they have so many interventions in place, because the more they can control, the less risk they're taking.
The system does not empower women. In fact, it goes opposite. It disempowers women, it scares women, it traumatizes women, let me put it that way.
U.S. rates are dismal. We're the most expensive place in the world to have a baby, and we have the worst outcomes in the developed world. It's really shameful.
Known that I wanted to be a birth worker, a professional that helps women during their childbearing year. Midwifery, even without the title of midwifery, has always been around. It just means to be with women, and there's always been wise women in the communities and in villages, and those women have always attended births. It's never been a private event where a mom was alone. That she was always surrounded by another mother or another grandmother who had knowledge of birth, who's experienced births. So that feeling of community surrounding birth and being supported has always been there. And I believe that once we became more industrialized as a country and as medical interventions started to be implemented, the midwifery model of care was suppressed.
In Florida, up until the 1930s or so, midwifery was pretty common. There were 4,000 licensed or practicing midwives in the state at that time. And then the medical profession very clearly wanted to wipe that profession out. They didn't want midwives practicing that weren't associated with doctors. So the intention was to just basically regulate the profession out of business.
The 1930s Act that was put in place to manage and basically control granny midwives as they were called, who were providing services throughout African American communities and serving white poor women as well as African American women, doing home births, home visits, and providing care in the community. That's how Florida and much of the southern United States delivered babies, and where essentially black women were delivering all of the communities. So that act was already in place in the Florida statute. That was adapted in the 80s and was then sunsetted and then was reopened and adapted yet again in the 90s.
In the mid-1980s, there were only 25 licensed midwives left in the state of Florida. And soon after that, it became illegal to educate direct entry midwives in the state of Florida. So that began a legislative grassroots process to get that law changed. It was successfully changed in 1992, allowing midwives to practice and be educated in the state again. It was a very comprehensive law that described the scope of practice for midwives, the required education, the Council of Licensed Midwifery that reports to the Department of Health and how that was all going to work together. So that came about in 1992, and this school was opened in 93. And since then, we've been slowly building those numbers of licensed midwives back up. The European model generally works that midwives are the primary caregivers for pregnant women, and pregnant women who become high risk or have complications develop are referred to a physician or a specialist, and the specialist handles those higher risk women that need a different model of care, while midwives take care of everyone else.
He's happy.
Yeah, he is.
That's what it is. He's happy.
The midwifery model of care is focused on the whole woman and her well-being and fostering a relationship that, establishes trust and understanding and informed consent throughout the pregnancy, labor, and birth of the mother. I would say the obstetric model of care is more of a factory type situation where many women come through the door and they know you by a chart, not by a relationship, not by who you are and who your children are.
She knew you, she knew your family, she knew your health, she knew your health history. She listened to you, she talked to you, she let birth take its course naturally. The model that it became was the absolute diametrically opposed opposite. Take you out of your community, away from your family, control the process with drugs and surgery, and work on the obstetrician's timeline. There is still in this state a backlash from American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, ACOG. In some factions of ACOG, there's a glimmer of hope that that is being recognized as not useful to women. And I think that has a lot to do with the statistics are horrible. Something's not working. We can't fix it the way we broke it.
So sadly, the United States is ranking very poorly against other developed countries in the world. We have one of the highest cesarean rates for our nation, yet our maternal and neonatal mortality rates are not dropping. If we're going to have more interventions and more cesareans, we should see a decrease in the mortality rates of moms and babies, but unfortunately in the U.S. that's not happening. 1 in 3 women walking into a hospital in today's America to give birth is going to be faced with a surgical birth, whether that's warranted or not. The World Health Organization says that we should be at less than 15% of women receiving cesarean sections. Typically, the midwifery model of care is seeing a 5 to 10% cesarean rate, and my practice is about an 8% or less in the last 3 years for my statistics. So it's just scary to think that women walk into a hospital with a really great chance of having a cesarean, and if they're getting inductions or other medical interventions, that risk goes up exponentially. And women don't know these statistics, they don't know this evidence, and they think that cesarean is the easy way, and it's not. The recovery is very difficult, and typically moms who have a vaginal birth are very satisfied with that experience.
The cesarean rate has befuddled many people, especially around the rest of the world, as far as what's happening here in the United States. Physiologically speaking, there's no real reason why this many women should have to have their babies cut out of them. The system encourages, supports, even perversely incentivizes physicians to cut. And unfortunately for us, especially over the last, I would say 15 years, everybody's just joined in with that as okay then.
Why do you think that is?
Because capitalism rules. Money talks. When I arrived, I saw so many things that really truly shocked me. I'm sad to say that 30 years hence, I'm still shocked and horrified. In fact, I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted and I'm embarrassed. This is a developed nation. There isn't any earthly excuse whatsoever for these persistent disparities in birth outcomes. We know that Black women are more at risk. We've known this. This is not new. It's not a new crisis. This is something I discovered when I got here. I didn't know about this before. The rest of the world does not know what's going on in this country. and nor may they ever, because of course we keep these things under wraps, keep these things a secret.
Black women are up to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. Black infants are twice as likely to die in the first year of birth, and that remains the case across lines of education, income, and healthcare coverage. It's about racism that is baked into our institutions, including healthcare.
We know, based on all statistics, that women of color have greater risks of adverse outcomes of mortality rates for mommy and baby. When we're studying in midwifery school, we're seeing that all the disparities are on the women of color or our minority women or our women of low socioeconomic status. So we're seeing women, who have little income or have Medicaid, they're not getting treated as well, and we've seen evidence of that doing studies, and those women have higher rates of cesarean, higher rates of mortality, and higher rates of poor outcomes. I believe any midwife is truly in the profession for serving women and making sure that that disparity gap is closed.
So collaborative care is very slowly glimmering on the horizon, where OBs are recognizing they can't do it all. They can't run a practice, they can't do surgery and give high quality access and prenatal care to all women. They're gonna have to have some help. Midwives provide that kind of care.
So I feel really fortunate to have really good friends that are providers and a good working relationship with physicians who help me when I need it. Sometimes it's really hard to establish those connections, especially if there's not a lot of midwifery in that area or exposure to midwifery. Then it's really hard because they don't have an understanding, and usually it's the lack of information on what we actually do as midwives and our training and credentials that kind of impede that possibility of relationship. I've been met with questions like, do you keep medical records, and are you allowed to have home birth? Is this safe? Why would you put your baby in danger? And these moms are met with this opposition and almost this animosity when they're with physicians that aren't aware of what we're trained to do. And sadly, they're kind of having to battle that if they're not in a setting with physicians that are aware of midwifery. I just feel like it's really sad that in this day and age, with the awareness and with the advocacy that is out there for women's rights, that we're still being met with this opposition for our rights. Like, women should have the ability to birth in the setting that they choose, with the healthcare professional that they choose or not. There shouldn't be, legalities surrounding their ability to do that. I feel like every woman should educate herself on her options. She should interview multiple providers and find what's the best fit for her. If she's high risk and decides to have a hospital birth, she should make a birth plan. If she decides she's low risk and wants to have midwifery care, she should interview multiple midwives if she has that option and find the best fit for the care provider for her. It's really about just gaining knowledge and making informed choices, because it's a really big decision. It's going to impact your whole pregnancy, your birth, and really the rest of your life.
I honestly believe that midwifery care and home birth and birth center birth, those are reproductive rights for women. The ability to choose with whom and where they give birth is a right. Ultimately, the care that midwives offer can provide a key to improving outcomes for women in this country.
As a midwife, I provide one option. There's only one. The majority of American women are delivering in hospitals, in systems where OBs are in charge, and OBs provide care a certain way. So I think it's important that we all have knowledge about these different ways and understand each other's different ways, so that our collaborations are more meaningful and we're in integrity with who we are inside of those collaborations. And then lastly, for the providers, if we're empowered, we might actually be happier. We might enjoy our work instead of railing and arguing and falling out and carrying on like we do. We might actually be able to just really be in pure enjoyment for the work and for the impact of the work. As a nation, we could see that around perinatal issues, around birth, we are able to finally be like really the rest of the world, clear about the fact that birth is not an illness unless you make it so or you let it happen, and that women can be empowered and are empowered in the birth experience.